My name is Eitan Chatayat, and welcome to I'm That podcast, where I get to talk to some pretty incredible people. Some are friends and colleagues, some are clients, and some are people I haven't even met yet. On I'm That, we'll hear from them about who they are, what they do and why, stuff they love or hate, mistakes they've made, victories they've had. They're all known for something, but by the time we're through, the hope is they'll have revealed some things we didn't know about them. Our talk may be deep, profound, funny, who knows really. One thing for sure, it'll be interesting and honest. So if you're up for that, thank you for joining me on I'm That, and here we go. Resilience expert Deborah Gilboa, MD, aka Dr. G, works with families, organizations, and businesses to identify the mindset and strategies to turn stress into an advantage. Renowned for her contagious humor, Dr. G works with groups across multiple generations to rewire their attitudes and beliefs and create resilience through personal accountability and a completely different approach to adversity. She's a leading media personality seen regularly on Today, Good Morning America, and The Doctors. She's also featured frequently in The Washington Post, The New York Times, Authority Magazine, and countless other digital and print outlets. Dr. G. Debbie is board certified attending family physician and is fluent in American Sign Language, and she lives in Pittsburgh with her 4 sons, and she's currently visiting in Israel, and we're sitting here in Tel Aviv, and it's a real pleasure to meet you.
It's really great to meet you too. Thank you for having me.
It's fun. You reached out to me, and here we are. So how's the trip so far?
It's been challenging. My oldest son is a lone soldier in the IDF. He drafted 3 years ago, and somewhere around October 8th or 9th, when we were talking for the 50th time in those few days, he said, "Hey, I'm sorry. I know this is what we both hoped wouldn't happen." Everybody in the world that I respect hoped this wouldn't happen. And yet he was right. Also within our relationship between the two of us, we together, without ever talking about it, had hoped. He was a sharpshooter in a combat unit. So we both knew immediately that this meant a different level for the two of us, with me 6,000 miles away.
Yeah, I can't even imagine how difficult that is as a parent.
He was injured, and so I'm here this trip because he had to have surgery. Thank God he's doing great, and he's really going to be okay. And he's come to the end of his sadir, his regular mandatory service.
Yeah.
And so far so good.
And he volunteered.
Yeah.
It's interesting. When I'm an old man now, but when I was 19, I volunteered. I was living in London, and I came and I served. And on the day that I enlisted or was drafted, Iraq invaded Kuwait. So we went into high emergency, and then of course war broke out. And I was also a lone soldier.
Can you please call your mother?
I was calling her a lot, but I did okay, and he's good. I hope everything is fine. I'm glad that he's okay. So I want you to introduce what it is that you're all about. But before I do that, typically when we start the show, I always ask a question. It's the same question. And I'm going to ask the question, and you just have to complete the sentence, and we just jump into it. All right?
I'm ready.
Okay. So, Dr. Debbie Gilboa, please complete the sentence. I'm that Jewish doctor who knows stress can be good for you. Okay. Well, that's brilliant, because I need to know. Everyone needs to know. Look, the Jewish people are going through a lot of stress, and everyone goes through a lot of stress. So tell me more about that. Okay. So to understand why I would say that, you need to understand just one, and don't be afraid of this word, neuroscience fact. The neuroscience fact is that our brains see all change as stressful, not just the bad changes. All change is stressful because, do you remember some point in your primary or secondary education learning the word, and I don't know if you're educated in English, but the word homeostasis? Does that word ring a bell? It actually doesn't. Okay, so I think for a lot of your audience, they're going to be like, pretend to be intelligent. No, I think for a lot of your audience, they're going to be like, oh, I wrote that word in a spiral notebook, or I had a Quizlet with that word in it. Homeostasis is our body's desire to keep everything in a really narrow range. You know that outside you can be in really high temperatures, really cold temperatures, but your body keeps your inside temperature within just 1 degree, right?
That's homeostasis. Your body works really hard to keep the inside a really stable environment. Our body does this in a ton of ways. It does it about temperature, but it also does it about your potassium levels and your blood counts and all kinds of things. And our brain believes that all change is risky. The reason that we want to keep everything the same is because our brain has millions of functions, but one job, and that job is to keep you alive. Good news. You're currently alive. It's working. So the brain looks at all change as suspicious. Whatever it is that I'm going through, no matter how hard, how upsetting, how uncomfortable, how dangerous, your brain thinks, but this status quo is acceptable because we're alive, and anything that challenges this status quo, no matter what it is, feels like a risk. And so in answer to that risk, our brain puts out certain chemicals. All right, so if all change is stressful, but some change is good, stress can't be toxic. Too much stress, absolutely coming at you. Everybody knows that can damage you. You're physically, emotionally. I see the ravages of stress in my patients all the time. So I'm not arguing that stress can be dangerous, but it's very much like exercise. If I told you that I wanted to run a marathon, you might say, oh, what are you doing to train? And if I said, oh, no, I'm just going to run it, you might look at me with a little pity, like, oh, you could die. People have died trying to run a marathon with no training. That's not a good idea. But if I told you, oh, I'm running a mile this week for all of this month, and then I'm going to start running 2 miles, you'd say, oh, okay. I don't know if it'll work, but that sounds reasonable. You train up. Well, in the exact same way that we train, that if I want to run more, I have to run more. And it's unfortunate. I don't love exercise. I wish it was different. But if I want to be more physically fit, I have to use my body and exercise. In the same way, if I want to be able to encounter more change and feel less out of breath, less sore, less overwhelmed, it's actually navigating change and stress that will get me there. That will get me there. So I wish that we could just snap our fingers and be ready. But in the same way that we do with our children, we look at what they're able to do and we think, okay, great. 5 years from now, you're going to have to be able to deal with a little bit more stuff. So what are we doing to train up? We can be really intentional about the way we react to stress that comes to us and curate the stress we choose. You're choosing a lot of stress. It's on purpose. Ever since October 7th, this is just the little window I have into your life through social media and your podcast. You're choosing a fair amount of stress because you said, this hasbara, it's too important not to do. I have to help explain, to represent, to speak, to reach out. But you're choosing that stress. You curated it because it matters to who you mean to be in the world you're trying to help create. If we can look at two things, two lanes, if we can look at how we navigate the stress that we can't control, that comes at us. I give people bad diagnoses some days. There's all kinds of things that come at us that we bear no responsibility for, but it comes to us. And the change I go after. We can actually use the stress that we encounter to strengthen ourselves a great deal of the time.
So how did you get into this briefly before we get into it?
So I'm a family doc. That means I see babies and I see kids and I see teenagers and I see their parents and their grandparents and in a few lucky cases, their great-grandparents. And after I finished med school and residency and I was an attending for a few years, I was starting to feel like, okay, I understand this doctoring thing. And yet some of my patients whom I'm treating the same way I'm treating others, they're not thriving. And I couldn't tell you by their diagnosis. Can I tell you a story?
Totally.
I was starting to notice this subconsciously, but I don't know if I would have really come face to face with it, except that one morning I had 2 patients in the same morning that really taught me a lesson. I walked in one morning to see a patient who'd been my patient for several years at that point. She had an illness called progressive MS. It's a rare subtype of multiple sclerosis where when you have a flare, instead of coming back almost to your baseline when you recover from the flare, each flare becomes your new baseline. So it's much more quickly progressive than regular MS. And when I was seeing her that particular morning, she's in a wheelchair. She can't reliably use her hands or legs. She had a toggle, very much like this microphone is right now, at her chin to move her wheelchair around. She's catheterized. I walk in and I say, hi, Miss So-and-so, how are you? And she said, I'm wonderful. And I said, tell me what's going on. And she said, the roses by my front door are coming up and my grandbaby turned 1 this weekend and we had a party and it was so great. And I'm going to that First Fridays concert series this weekend I'm really excited about. And I said, great. And we went on and had our appointment. And I don't think I would have really thought much of it, except that 2 patients later, I knocked on a different door to see another woman who's also a lady in her mid-50s, college educated, socioeconomically same level, and medically speaking, has some mild occasional sciatica, low back pain. And I walk in and I say, how are you? And she says, I'm terrible. I say, tell me what's going on. And she said, well, nobody understands about my back. My work doesn't accommodate me and my family doesn't even consider it when they plan things. And I said, has your pain been worse? And she looked at me like I was crazy. And she said, well, no, but it could be. And I went on to help her as best I might. But I couldn't help thinking transparently, how do I get my kids to grow up behind door number 1? Not that I wish a progressive illness on them, of course, but they will go through hard things. What does that lady have that this lady doesn't? And how can I give it to people on purpose? And so when I looked into that, I did what I'd been trained to do. I went to the medical literature. That difference is simply called patient resilience, which I'll grant you sounds like a cop-out. But I thought, okay, annoying things can also be true. What if it's true? What is that? What is resilience? How do we get it? We have some narratives in our society that would make you think that it's just like your eye color, right? We say like, oh, well, he doesn't handle change well, or she's really sensitive. And those things might be true about those people. I don't know, right? But I wanted to know, can you do anything about it on purpose? Can you affect resilience on purpose? And so that's what I spent the last 15 years doing.
Well, you know what? I think I want to immediately bring it to the Jewish people, because internally, and I don't know that a lot of non-Jewish people know this about us, but what we not like to say, but what we do say is that we are a very resilient people. And a lot of people are saying resilient AF now, resilient as fuck. So there's October 7th and the stress and the trauma that goes with that as an Israeli, that I feel, that many of my brothers and sisters and family here feel, that our community feels here. And there's also the stress and the trauma of being a Jew abroad, facing an unprecedented level of anti-Semitism and quite literal Jew hatred that, while many listeners, and I'd say most of them aren't Jewish, can't really relate to that beyond what they see in the news and maybe what their Jewish friends are telling them. But then there are a lot of Jewish people not speaking about it because they're afraid to. And I think that that's a huge amount of stress too. So I want to bring it straight to what we're going through as a people. And, remember, there's only 16 million of us, we don't have almost 2 billion Muslims, which are 25% of the population, or the amount of Christians there are in the world, or Hindus, 16 million people that are, for the most part, reeling, and not only reeling, but not able to move past the trauma right now because we're still here in Israel. I mean, you're here 2 days ago, suicide drone attack 10 minutes from where we're sitting right now. It killed a person, injured 10, almost took a building down. And every other day there's something happening here. And there's so much stress abroad as well. So, you know what? I don't have any specific questions. I just want you to talk. And I think that we talked about this for a second, and total transparency is, what value can we add right now to people listening, whether they're Jewish or not, but through the example of what the Jewish people are going through, to help with what it is that you specialize in. And so I want to give you free rein and just tell us what we can do to the listener that we can help right now.
I'm wondering if someone listening can think to themselves, if it resonates for them that they've been feeling a lot of stress. Can you ask yourself, what changes have you encountered? Everything you mentioned is probably a change in that person's lifetime or view of the world. One of the things that I hear people talking about a ton outside of Israel around anti-Semitism is, we just learned that the history of Jews is still the history of Jews. That's something we had heard about that sounded like it happened to a different generation, that we were maybe post-historical in some way, that's not true.
The trauma of Jew hatred.
Right. And so we are trying to change our outlook and our understanding of how the world relates to us and what we need to do to keep our families safe and to move forward. And some people are frozen and reeling. Some people are distancing themselves and trying to suppress their Jewish identity and pass in a lot of situations as not Jewish, even in their own minds in some ways. Here's what I want everybody to know. Resilience is not the lack of emotional experience. It's not a lack of difficult emotions or frustration or anger or sadness or worry. Resilience is the ability to navigate change towards a positive goal. There are 8 different skills, and this is what I was so excited to discover in my research, because traits are lovely. Your eye color is a trait. There's nothing you can do about it. It just is. Skills, my mom of blessed memory, she was a school teacher. You can teach skills and you can learn skills. Well, there are 8 skills, each one of which build our ability to navigate change towards a positive goal. We're doing one now. We're building connections. That's a skill. And it's one that, in general, the Jewish people has a lot of experience with. It costs nothing. And so for millennia, we've been saying, well, I know somebody who knows somebody, or let me reach out to that shtetl to see, I think maybe your cousin studied with a boy in that town, right? Building connections strengthens us. It helps us to navigate change towards a positive goal. And it's what you've been doing. You decided that your miluim, your reserve duty after October 7th, was this work to say, I'm not only going to keep going, and I know you have, keep going in the work that I was doing, I'm also going to use all the skills that I have and all the resources and the connections that I have to try and affect some sort of positive change. The reason that as a people we consider ourselves resilient is because we have navigated a great deal of change. The difference, how many times have you heard someone say in the last 9 months, we're no longer the Jew of the trembling knee?
Yeah.
We've decided to navigate this change towards a positive goal, not just survive, but something more than just surviving. And that is resilience. One of the things we need the most to help us be resilient is empathy. And I think that's been a real obstacle for a lot of us. We expected so much empathy from the world. And I heard Shai Davidai speak on your podcast, and he said he thought for sure that right after this happened, he said to his wife, Yardan, right after this happened, that night, now the rest of the world will see. And he felt, and you guys spoke several months after the event, he felt like there he'd been wrong. And you were very encouraging. You said, so far, it's coming.
I still think so.
And I don't disagree, but it hasn't been fast enough for a lot of people to feel, a lot of Jews to feel the empathy. And Israelis turn to each other. My son is going to spend some time in the States as a part of his rehab. And one of the things I'm worried about his resilience is that he's leaving a place where the people in his community and his family and just out on the street honor his service. And he's coming to a place where he might be reviled for his service. That lack of empathy, and I understand that that's a very gentle way to explain what I'm describing, but that lack of empathy can be very dangerous to our resilience. And it's one of the reasons that I think that people in the diaspora who are struggling, and it would be easier to turn from this and pretend it's not happening, it's because that is another change to navigate, that lack of empathy. Empathy is one of the best ways that we can help someone else navigate a change. So for all of your listening audience who says, well, I'm not Jewish, I'm interested in this, I've heard this, I believe this, that's all empathy is. It's saying, I believe you feel what you say you feel. You don't have to have felt it. You don't have to understand it. You don't even have to agree with it. If you can say, I believe you feel that, that's empathy.
What's the third, the fourth, the fifth, the sixth? I want to know.
Okay, so the skills. So there's really, I'm putting 2 things together. There's 5 strategies that help other people navigate change. But what we need to know, I think more importantly, are what are the skills that we can rely on that help us to navigate this, to build our own resilience. They're not all useful in every situation. One of the times I needed the most resilience, I'm an only child, is when my mom was dying. She was on hospice.
Sorry.
And thank you. It was 10 years ago, and she was a really wonderful lady in a lot of important ways. And some of these skills weren't useful to me at that time, but building connections was. These skills aren't in any particular order, except the order that I memorized them in when I was writing my book about them. Meaning they're a toolbox. They're not a recipe. It's not a do 1 and then 2 and then 3 and then 4. It's not like that. You have to know, what change am I facing? What stress am I facing? Because remember, those words are pretty much synonymous in our brains. And maybe your change is a great one. You found out that your family is expanding by a person in a lovely way. Someone's getting married, somebody's taking on a partner, someone's having a baby, whatever it is. Maybe you got the job you wanted. Maybe you got the grant or the opportunity or your pitch. Someone said yes, they would accept it. Also, in those situations, your brain goes through 3 safety mechanisms in the face of every change: loss, distrust, and discomfort. What could I lose? Do I trust this? That I should do this, that it's really going to happen, that I got into school, that they said yes, that I got the job? And then lastly, what's going to be uncomfortable about it? I would imagine when you turned to your partner and said, I really want to do this work, I want to add on to the work I do, no matter how supportive your partner was, her brain, just to keep her safe, said, could that be dangerous? Are you sure you should do this? Like, what do you mean when you say that? And will be accepted the way you want to give it? And who will help you? And will you lose clients because you do this? That's the distrust. And then just, are you going to be here for bedtime? How many more hours a week are we talking about? Are you going to is the podcast studio in our living room going to grow? Am I not going to be able to serve, to be able to sit in my own living room? Loss, distrust, and discomfort also happen when we encounter great change. When you find out that you got the job, your brain says, do I have any relationships where this will really destroy it? Like maybe I'm close to somebody that I work with now. Will we not be able to keep that friendship when I go take this other job? Did that email say I got it or just I made it to the next interview? I'm going to go read that again. And discomfort. Where will I park? How expensive is the food in that neighborhood? Is the HR lady there going to love me the way the HR lady loves me at the job I'm at now? Loss, distrust, and discomfort are just reflexes. So one of the things I really want people listening to hear is that when they feel that loss, that distrust, that discomfort, it's not because they're lazy or obstinate or closed-minded or because they've made the wrong decision. It's a reflex. Just like if I tapped your knee and you kicked.
But what you're really saying is it's external. It's coming from the outside.
The change comes from the outside, but all this happens in your amygdala,
right,
in your brain. And so what I'm saying is we have a real narrative around, well, if you have a bad feeling about it, don't do it. Your gut, trust your gut. I'm like, first of all, it's not your gut. That's your colon. It's your brain. Second of all, think it through. If that reaction makes you pause and consider things, that's really safe and healthy. But if every time you have what you consider to be a negative reaction to hearing about an opportunity or a change or considering doing something to make the world better, and you think, oh, my gut's telling me not to. No, your gut is so afraid of change that when people are in a hotel ballroom and a fire alarm goes off, 70% of them sit and look around. That's what the research shows. Our brain is really hesitant. Even change that could save our lives in that moment, our brain says, wait a minute, loss, distrust, discomfort. So don't believe that knee-jerk, wait a minute, should guide all the rest of your decision-making.
There's, I know that you're somewhat familiar with my work, but I have this series called The Jewish People, which is, I think, my favorite campaign, where I just write sentences and I sign it, The Jewish People. And one of my favorite lines was, it's okay to have fear. It's what you do with that fear.
Right.
That matters.
You're not what happens to you. You are who you choose to be in the face of what happens to you. Right? If you're not afraid, you don't need courage. I'm not an adventurous eater because I've never met a food I don't like. You have to be an adventurous eater when you've tasted things you haven't liked.
Yeah.
So if you're facing something and you're thinking, I'm not sure, great. Listen to that, but think it through.
So I want to ask you some, kind of like the difference between good stress and bad stress, if there is such a thing, it's just stress.
Right. These are just chemicals, right? It's like good blood or bad blood. You just have blood. So you have these chemicals, and it is very important that you notice when you shove your emotions down, for short periods of time, your body can absolutely handle that. Your brain can handle it. But for months and months and months, if you refuse to give voice to your emotions, that's very physically damaging. Migraines, ulcers, heart attacks. Our brain finds a way.
Because you're basically repressing.
Right.
And there's a physical manifestation of repressing.
For sure.
So, I mean, let's bring it to the Jewish people.
Yes.
So, we were talking about resilience, and it's because of so many things that we've gone through for thousands of years. Like, is this just like the latest round of stress? Like what makes this time that we're all going through these past 9 months or so, like different than the other times?
Because it's happening to us. Here's the thing. We're not resilient as a people because of what we've gone through. We've survived and thrived through what we've gone through because we're a resilient people. Because our teachings drive us towards continuing to have purpose. And purpose is actually one of the best antidotes. And I don't mean to the mental illness of depression. I mean to feeling low, right? Depression is a real thing. Can be a chemical imbalance. It can need medicine, treatment, all those things. 18% of people deal with chronic mental illness. 100% of people deal with mental distress. Right now, almost 100% of Jews I know are dealing with mental distress on a daily basis. And it's not our practice going through things that have made us resilient. It's how we go through things that makes us resilient. And all the stories that we have heard, that we tell on purpose every year at Pesach, that we have heard, that we learn in school as kids, that we learn at our tables and our kitchens as kids, to remind us we've been through other hard things. There's research that shows that if a child grows up in a home that has a story about bootstrapping financially from nothing to riches, they do usually okay when they hit financial obstacles as an adult. Somebody who's grown up with a story of we used to be really wealthy and then we fell and now we've been in poverty, they don't do very well. But the kids who grow up to be adults who are the most financially successful are ones who have heard the stories of bootstraps to riches, to falls, to riches, to falls, whatever that looked like. Cycles of thriving and struggling and thriving and struggling builds resilience in a kid, in a community, in an entire people. And that's what we've done. We've made sure to continue to tell our stories. And it's not that we have learned to be more resilient through them, it's that we have learned from them how resilient we are.
That's fascinating. What is it that you kind of like have been going through yourself in the last, almost year with, you're Jewish, you have, a kid in the army, I don't know, how's it for you? And as a professional that does what you do, I mean, in that context, like what tools have you been using that have really helped you? Because I really want to get to some practical things that could help Jewish people right now, how they can handle it. And what better example than not only you're a professional in your field, but you are, kind of on the front lines. This is very, very personal to you. You have a soldier, in the army.
One of the things that I've seen, and I'm happy to tell you the stuff I've been through, but one of the things that I've seen is that so many people, especially so many Jews not in Israel, we hesitate to talk about our struggles because we think that there's some sort of comparison board going on, some sort of leaderboard. And we're down at the bottom of the leaderboard, so how can we complain? But every single person has change that they're navigating that's really hard. So when the war broke out, I realized that I was going to go through something that I'd only ever read about or seen in movies. And that was the goodbye with my son. So what people outside of Israel won't necessarily know is that when soldiers go into an active war zone, at least here, they don't take their phones. So what happens? The commanders say, call your mom. And I love this about Israel. Call your mother, say goodbye. So I would get a phone call from my son. Ima, they're taking our phones. We're going in. I love you. We would talk for a little bit. The first time this happened, I was traveling. I was in California, October 13th, and he woke me at 4 a.m, time zones. My kids know, only my kids, you can always wake me. You don't have to do the math, just call. If you need me, you just call. So he called at 4 a.m. I woke up faster than I've woken up since residency. There's a trauma coming into the emergency room. I woke up like that. And up until then, we'd been having these like heartfelt, very short, but heartfelt intermittent conversations. For that one, it was like I was dropping them off for the soccer championships, which I've also done. You've got this. I hear you. I'll be thinking about you. There's nothing you can go through that we can't work out when you get back. You just do your job. Be great. I love you. You got this. Hung up, fell apart. Had a really rough 30 hours while I was trying to work. I was in California to give presentations at this retreat for a corporation. Every time I wasn't with the client and all the people, I was just really struggling, like really sad, feeling all these emotions, trying to reach out to people who could get it. And that's a really important thing. A really important strategy is reaching out to not who would be mad at you if you didn't reach out, if they found out you were upset, you didn't call. You don't have time for that. Who can you reach out to who can either speak to or be quiet to you the way you need in that moment? It's a thing in the States to put in your phone, your ICE, your in case of emergency, so that the police know who to call if they grab your phone because you're in a car accident. But we have a different ICE in different situations. So when my kid's on my last nerve, I have one person I call. But when I'm afraid for my child's safety in a war zone, in a conflict that a lot of the people in my world don't respect, I got a whole different person I got to go to for that. After about 30 hours, my phone rings. Hey, Emma, we didn't go in. We rode that roller coaster 7 times before I didn't get a call to tell me that he wasn't in. Someone very close to me said after the 4th time, Deb, I hear you, but I mean, it might not even be real. Like how do you? And I said, listen, if he believes it, I have to believe it. While we're on the phone, I have to believe it because one of these times it's going to be true. And you can hear I'm choking up just thinking about it. And then it was true. And then it was 29 days until I got word that he was okay. That is a very long time. So what are the strategies that I used? I relied on my connections. I made new ones. Like our kids going off to college in the States, there are groups, right? In the States, there's like Facebook groups and all these groups for parents. And I've always stayed away from those because my kids are pretty good communicators and because I don't need to know. So I wasn't in any of the WhatsApp groups for the parents until they went in and we couldn't talk to them. And then I needed those people.
So you leaned into your community.
And I made new communities. I didn't know any of those people beforehand. And all I did was put in my poorly spelled Hebrew a note in the group that said, hey, I'm the mom of a lone soldier, which is a known quantity here. People know what that means. I'm in the US. How's everybody doing? And I got this outpouring of support because these moms could understand that I wasn't more afraid than they were, but I was more separate. And that when we got a note one Friday morning, hey, all the parents can come for an hour to the base this afternoon to see them once they were out, I couldn't. So a bunch of people reached out to me. What can I bring him? I'll find him, send me a picture. What does he look like? And they sent me pictures of them with him and let him use their phone to call me and say hello. So connections for me is a really big one. Another skill is setting boundaries. And people think setting boundaries is about saying no. So if that popped into your head when I said setting boundaries, that's not what it is. Setting boundaries is the ability to line up what you choose to do, your actions, with your actual priorities.
For
example, during that time, anything anybody wanted me to volunteer for at my kid's school, or could you just grab this thing, or hey, do you want to come to my bridal shower? I was like, does that line up with the... Probably it does not. I'm going to stay over here in this lane. When it was my birthday, though, and my birthday is early November, my friends called me and they said, hey, we're not ignoring your birthday. Sorry. I get it. You're not feeling celebratory. It was in that 29 days. I had no idea what was happening, but I was terrified. They said, but we're going to do something. What do you want to do? And I was like, I want to hang up posters of hostages. We live in a university town and they've been being torn down. So I thought about it and they were like, okay, that sounds festive. So my dear friends gathered at my house. I said, wear clothes you don't like because I had an idea. So we went down to the university. It was raining. It was November in Pennsylvania. It's not amazing weather. We're all bundled up and we took spray glue and we glued the back of all the posters and poured on all this blue and silver glitter. And then we packing taped them to poles, knowing that when people pulled them down, they would get covered in the colors of Israel. My resilience is sparkly. I wanted something that aligned with, like, who am I trying to be? Right? I wanted to be somebody who said to these people who've been trying to be supportive and were looking for ways to help me and really love me and really were also worried about my kid whom they've been around and helped raise and love also. I didn't want to say no to celebrating my birthday, but celebrating just was not a verb I could get my brain around at that point. So I was like, okay, but if I have these people who want to spend a couple hours with me, here's what we're going to do. And then we made it funny. And for me, that was a strategy. And it did help me feel like we were doing the right thing, that I set the right boundaries, that it wasn't just, do I do something for my birthday or not do something for my birthday? You can make choices. And that's one of the things that really helps when you decide, when you remember. I talked about how our brains say loss, distrust, discomfort. That's all in the amygdala. As soon as you ask yourself, and you probably do this, everyone listening does this dozens of times a day. You face something you weren't expecting. The dishwasher won't start. There's a parking ticket on your car. Your kid comes out and their pants, they've grown out of them overnight. Whatever it is, just something unexpected that could trip you up, or something lovely. You walk in and you brought your lunch to work, but somebody brought lunch in for everyone. Whatever. Loss, distrust, discomfort are these safety bumps. And some of them we go through so quickly, small changes, we don't even notice them. As soon as you think to yourself, well, what choices do I have? I can stick my lunch in the work fridge, take it home at the end of the day and join everybody. Or they have a thing I don't like. I'm glad I have my lunch. Whatever it is, as soon as you think, what choices do I have? That lights up your prefrontal cortex, which calms your amygdala.
It's funny, like one of the things that I always say to my kids, it's funny actually how much I try to deal with the situation that we're all facing and all the daily things that we have to get through, whether it's sending your kids here in school to Israel, or whether you're Jewish and sending your kids to school abroad if they're Jewish and going to Jewish school, or whether I'm going to the supermarket. I mean, look, there was a drone attack a couple of days ago, which, pretty serious shit, but go back to the first 3 or 4 months of the war, there were rocket attacks daily on Tel Aviv. So just allowing the kids to go to school, or maybe sending your, 20-year-old to university college campus, which is hostile. So there are all sorts of parallels. But one of the things that I try and always do with myself, and it's something that I'm trying to teach my children, which is everything is a choice. Like, you always have a choice. And even when you think you don't have a choice, you still have a choice. Because the worst situation possible, if we think about the hostages who are alive, that even they have choices, and those choices are in their head. Am I going to think this, or am I going to think that? Am I going to do this, or am I going to do that? And I think that that knowing that you have a choice really does not only de-stress, it gives you, it makes you feel less helpless.
Because it reminds you that you are less helpless.
Yes, exactly.
It doesn't trick us. It bolsters us. My mom used to say, if you're still breathing, you have choices. You may not like any of them, but you have some.
Yeah, and it goes back to kind of like what I said about fear, which we're all feeling. Okay, you feel fear. Well, what are you going to do about it? That is a choice. You have a choice.
And expressing your emotions is really helpful. It's really healthy to express your emotions. If you can express your emotions at someone who can hear them, who can believe that you're feeling that way, it's even more useful for you and successful. Sometimes you're the only person who can really believe you. So one skill is being able to give yourself some empathy. Instead of allowing the narrative in your head, instead of choosing to think, what's wrong with me? Other people have it worse than I do. Things aren't so bad that I can't. All those things might be true, but they're not empathy. If someone else said them to you, we'd be like, nope, that's not how we give comfort. We don't tell people how to feel. We don't tell them they're stupid for how they feel. We just say, yeah, I believe you.
I once sat down for a dinner with a really close friend of mine. It was over 20 years ago. And she went through a miscarriage. And she sat down. We were sitting in New York. She's one of my closest friends. And she was telling me about everything that she had gone through, which as a man in my early 30s at the time, it was very difficult for me to comprehend the kind of pain, the trauma that she went through. And I thought I was doing all the right things. I was like, no, you're going to be okay and you're going to get through this. I was just trying to be supportive. And she got so mad at me. She blew up at me. And I didn't understand why. And it took me a while to understand why, not in the evening. It took me a while. I ended up writing a piece about it. That the one thing that and I don't like to use the word should. I try not to. I'm really practicing that. The one thing that I realized was that just listen. Just say, I hear you. That must suck. Yeah.
In Judaism, we're told that when you go to sit with someone who's lost someone close to them, you're not supposed to speak.
Yeah.
You're just supposed to sit and be quiet with them. I find that almost impossible, but really good advice.
It is. There's another organization that I was a part of. I helped found the Israeli chapter of the Entrepreneurs Organization. It's an international organization. And they have a methodology that when you sit down with forums, you have forums. And in these group meetings, you talk about family, you talk about your personal experience, and you talk about the business shit that you're going through. And while it's not a support group, the idea is entrepreneurs are very lonely, because and I'm an entrepreneur and you have to do things on your own. You don't have if you're at the top, who do you speak to if you're the leader of the company? And one of the approaches was when you want to give someone advice, you don't give them advice. You give a shared experience. You say, I hear you. What you're talking about reminds me of something that I went through. Can I share that with you? And that way you're not talking at them. You're just talking about something that you went through without the advice, without the you should, and I think that, where all of this is taking me is something that I really believe in. Again, I know that you approached me, but there's a lot of bravado out there in the Jewish world. And I think that that's important. I think everything's important right now, but I've never been one to hide my vulnerability and what worries me and what scares me. And I think I derive great strength from being vulnerable. I think there's great strength in vulnerability. And I wanted to speak with you about that, maybe ask you to talk about that, because I don't think again, the word should, I don't think we should hide how we're feeling. And I don't think we should hide how we're feeling to ourselves. And I think the more open that we are about that, the stronger we become. And also as a community, which I'd love to hear about from you, because you're saying something that I've been saying for a while, which is you have to lean into your community. A lot of people are saying, don't speak to the echo chamber. We have to reach the middle ground. And I'm like, okay, we can do that in tandem. But the number one priority is for us to speak to ourselves, meaning us, the individual, like me when I look in the mirror, but also to speak to my community and to be vulnerable. And I wanted to kind of ask you about that. I saw you nodding your head for a second.
It is incredibly valuable to your brain chemistry to be vulnerable with trustworthy people. And so the first thing I'm asking people to do is to be trustworthy to themselves, to practice turning off that negative self-talk, that narrative that they have, that when they're having an emotion, they say to themselves, oh, what's wrong with me? And I don't have it as bad as that person does. It doesn't matter. Be kinder to yourself first. And then I very much want you to figure out who in your circle and who in your community is trustworthy to hear your emotions, not to fix them, not even to necessarily agree with them, but to value the relationship enough to listen and to be interested. I don't want, and I think a lot of people are experiencing right now, people to be sharing in such a way where they could be attacked in a surprise way. Right? If you decide to be vulnerable to a group of people, especially online, and you know that opens you to attack, but you've decided it's important towards reaching your goal, whatever your goal is, then I value you. I want you to have a lot of support around you so that you can deal with those slings and arrows. But I want people to be intentional, because I think some of the things that people are learning, especially on college campuses, is that some of the people they thought were trustworthy were not. I can tell you that some of the people in my community who have been really incredible allies for Black Lives Matter and for the Me Too movement and feminists, they are finding that they don't just feel vulnerable, they feel damaged and traumatized. People they thought were trustworthy to hear how they really feel and what they really believe are not. So vulnerability is really useful, but it isn't, it shouldn't be scattershot. We should be really careful with it, I think.
How do you feel about vulnerability within the Jewish community? And because you talked about online for a second, and I see quite a lot of, I wouldn't say hate, but there's a lot of intolerance. There's a lot of shaming people. I'm not talking about the people who I feel comfortable shaming, like the self-proclaimed being Jewish means nothing to me and Israel can go to hell as a Jewish person. You know, for me, fuck you, let's go.
Queers for Palestine. Yeah. I'm good with shaming them.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm just saying, well, they're just not even beyond, that's beyond shame. That's just like, you're idiots. But literally, I feel that there's a lot of Jew on Jew attacking going on because they didn't speak, they haven't spoken yet, they didn't say the right thing. And I don't like it. I don't think it's very beneficial. But I wanted to kind of like touch that subject from your professional perspective.
So my goal in answering that question is to think about what's going to build individual people's resilience. And what I'll use a personal example.
Please.
Someone that I know, someone Jewish that I know pretty well, reached out to me. We were having a conversation. They asked how my son was doing. And we ended up in a conversation about Israel where he told me that he really holds the Israeli government accountable because of their choices for all of the anti-Semitism that's now popping up in the world. And that is very different than how I see it.
Me too.
And the question that I ask myself, because by the way, there's a real downside to deciding that your expertise is in resilience and then doing 15 years of research. You can't really ever complain about anything. You got to just handle what comes along. Lost luggage, be resilient. Your kids are losing their minds, be resilient. And my kids, when I start to lose my mind, will turn to me and be like, hey, isn't that off brand? And I'm not allowed to hit them because I'm a mandated reporter. Anyway, when...
The bar is high.
Right, exactly. I made the bar high. Big rookie mistake. Don't do it. You should definitely go out there and learn to speak on the media about things like, I don't know, popcorn. Yeah. I like popcorn. Every time I face something, whether it's this guy's WhatsApp message or a comment on my Facebook or Instagram, or I got doxxed this year. That was exciting. Right around December, January, FBI had to get involved. Pictures of my kids were posted online. Like scary, really scary. People were trying to get me fired from the health center where I worked because of my views about Israel. And every time I face something that gets my attention, not like, I don't know, a parking ticket where I'm like, oh, but something that really gets my attention, I always ask myself, okay, I have to decide, is this change that I'm facing, this stressor, is it avoidable or unavoidable? And is it useless or useful? If it's unavoidable, you know what those are, right? Like, so you think about something and you think, is this avoidable or unavoidable? And I'll give you an example of something that is both unavoidable and useless in a second. But I ask myself, is this avoidable or unavoidable? Usually it's unavoidable. But sometimes even if it's avoidable, like adopting a dog, that was avoidable. I didn't have to do that. Nobody held a gun to my head, but it was useful. What do I mean by useful? It was getting me more towards the life I want. Okay. So if it's unavoidable or useful or both, then I just ask myself one question. Who do I mean to be in the face of this change? So who do I mean to be in the face of this guy who's a friend saying something to me that I find really confronting and provocative and wrong? And what I decided is I'm meant to be the kind of friend who said so, respectfully. Respectfully, the examples of anti-Semitism starting on October 7th and 8th undercut your argument that this is simply a reaction to political policies happening in a very small country. And I said it, and our relationship is strained. And I decided that was okay. When I got doxxed, who do I mean to be in the face of this? I decided I meant to be somebody who went in and talked to the leadership in my health center, who were trying to decide if they should let me go, that I should be the kind of parent who talked to my kids. If somebody shows up at our house, because our address got published online in these groups, if someone shows up at our house, what would you do? and the kind of parent who doesn't just say, here's what you do, the kind of parent who said to my kids who were 15 and 17 at the time. So if you walked outside of the door, we live in a row house in the city. If you walked outside our door and there were people with, bullhorns or protest signs or rocks or anything, what would you do? My 17-year-old had a great answer. He said, I would say, do you know we're children? Is this a good look for you?
It's a great answer.
Which was terrific because it made me laugh. It reassured me somewhat. It reminded me who he is in the face of this. His 15-year-old brother was like, yeah, they should be embarrassed. We're children.
That's great.
Only time I've ever had a teenager.
I wish we could say that.
Gladly tell me, like, we're children. Every time I face something that's hard, my mom's diagnosis, not just this, my son, my 17-year-old looking at universities, my 20-year-old returning to university, I ask myself, okay, who do I mean to be in the face of this? It's the same thing I asked myself when Ari called me at 4 a.m. Real fast, I was like, who do I mean to be that he's going to carry with him into Gaza? I mean to be somebody who is no longer heartfelt. I'm not somebody he has to make feel better. I am somebody who's just there supporting him, saying the few things I want on repeat in his head best I can. That's who I mean to be. So that's who I'm going to be. And then I'll deal with the emotional fallout. It's not always easy. Meaning afterwards, you can be like, that was awful or exhausting, or I might have to throw up right now. But the question you can always ask yourself, the strategy you can always ask yourself is, what choices do I have? And given those choices, who do I mean to be in the face of this?
You speak with such passion. What is it that you love most about what you do?
I love most turning the camera just like 10 degrees and helping people look at something that they know intimately, far more intimately than I could, and see it a little differently.
It's funny. My wife and I have this recurring argument. Sometimes it's spoken, sometimes we're shouting at each other. But, marriage is fucking hard. And I love my wife. She's amazing. We have something that I think a lot of couples go through when one of us is trying to change the other. And there's always this, well, you can't change someone. And I agree. I don't think that you can change someone, but I think that you can change 5%. You can change 10%. You can do that work. And that those little changes can make massive changes. It's like, okay, so I eat, I'm a carnivore, but let's say I go vegetarian. So that's not 100% of my life. That's a little part of my life, but that little change can make a massive change in my diet. By the way, I'm still a carnivore. I'm just using it as a hypothetical. But yeah, I'm just like, I like what you said because it makes it easier to embrace. And it's not as scary to say, well, look, you don't have to change everything that you are. You just need to shift perspective a little bit. And that little bit will make a massive change. So you see it, I'm sure you see it with people that you work with.
I see it with whole organizations. We've been taught to fear stress. Generations now of people have been told, basically, if you're very stressed, you're doing life wrong. And that is bullshit. If you are stressed, you're facing a lot of changes. You could audit those changes, the ones that you have some control over. You might even be able to, the ones that are unavoidable, some of them you might be able to postpone. Like, oh, you know what? We were trying to move, but this is not the year. So we're going to look at moving next year. Big changes even. I'm supposed to start this new job, or I am going to start this new job, but then we were also trying to plan this family celebration. What if we had a big 51st anniversary party for my parents instead of a 50th anniversary party, right? So we tend to think, well, I'm stuck with all these changes. Take control of what you can take control of, but then things will keep coming at you. We've been through so much change as a community in the last 9 months. And what I'm asking people to do is really 2 things. 1, stop feeling like you're failing because you're stressed. Just a lot of change. And 2, think seriously about what you choose in the face of that.
Think seriously about what you choose in the face of that.
There are 3 things we can always control. Not that they're easy to control, but they are always within our control, even in the worst of situations. We can always choose our attitude, our behaviors, and our goal.
I know that we kind of have to wrap up soon, but I have 3 questions for you, and I'm going to try and ask you to be concise, not because of any other reason that I think that with these particular things, it can sound abstract, and it's because we're not giving specific examples. So I'm going to try and just like come up with a couple of practical tips. So, and I might put you on the spot a little bit here, but just think about it anyway. Who's a good example of someone who you think deals well with stress that we in the community might know or be familiar with? And it doesn't need to be a specific person. It can also be just like a kind of a person or profession or a job or...
No, I want to give 2 examples. One is someone that I met through your podcast, Melinda Strauss.
Oh, she's lovely.
Yeah. She deals with stress from what I can see from the very outside. I've never met the woman or spoken to her, but from what I can see, and this is what our community could see if they follow her, is that she chooses her attitude and sets her boundaries. And she doesn't apologize or explain either of those things.
That's a brilliant example.
She just does that.
And by the way, just on that note, just look up Melinda Strauss on TikTok.
And Instagram,
right? And
right?
Instagram as well. Yeah, we've actually become good friends. She's lovely. That's a great answer. And you said someone else.
Elon Levy.
Elon Levy.
I don't know anything about his stressors, but I know that he navigates the changes that have happened by continuing to say, you can't take anything away from me that I've done. One of the things that I love is that his podcast intro continues to be a reel of him being invited on all these major shows as a representative of the Israeli government. He got fired from that job. I don't know any of the backstory, but it is still who he is. It is still what he's done. He didn't cast that to the side because someone else tried to.
Because it's his purpose
right.
to be that person.
Exactly.
So.
And so he said, this is still my purpose. This is still, he doesn't let someone else define his role or his goals. That's how it seems to me from the absolute outside.
Great example. What are the things that people can do? And this is, again, it's abstract, so practical if you can, if it's even possible, to transform the negative stress into positive stress or into...
So it's all just stress.
It's all
but
just
here's
stress,
what I would say. I think what you're asking is, how can people feel less overwhelmed or burnt out?
Something like that.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. So one is setting boundaries about when you interact with the things that are the hardest for you. So you don't have an obligation to follow the news 24/7, but you are probably, if you're following the news a lot, somebody who feels much calmer when you know what's going on than when you don't. So you can say either, I'm going to take this hour a day where I don't, or I'm going to take this hour a day where I do, but you can put time boundaries around it so that your brain has a chance to have periods of time where it's not firing your amygdala full force all the time. So that's one practical way that you can still be in the know. And I believe that knowledge is power. And genuinely give your brain a chemical break.
Yeah, I think that's really, really, really good advice.
And really hard to follow.
And really hard to follow. I took a week off of social media. This week I took 6 days. I just, I don't just pick up the phone and just start filming. I do a lot of produced work and you've seen the work that I'm doing. It's a lot of produced content. And I just stayed away, and I actually thought that it would be really hard. It was a joy. It's actually really hard to be back on. So this is the final question. Well, the final question would be, where can people find you and follow you? But like the last one to you specifically is, what can the world learn from what the Jewish people are going through right now?
Again, I'll take 2 things.
Yeah. Please.
One, tell the ugly stories too. Don't clean things up all the time. Tell the stories of struggle and strife, and then successes, and then struggle and strife. Learn to tell stories in cycles like we do, so that you will be reminded, no matter what you're going through, that not just other people, but that your people, your family, your community, your religion, whatever it is, your nation, have gone through this before and will probably survive this. And then the other thing that we really, I think the world can learn from this is to look for nuance. We are stuck in this dynamic of oppressor and oppressed. And every single person that grew up with siblings knows that it's more complicated than one sibling always being right and the other sibling always being wrong. Every little kid knows Well, you don't know what happened before that. And it's what they did to me before that, right? Every little kid knows that there is nuance to conflict. It has gotten too easy to name heroes and villains and never look again. We need to embrace nuance. We need to be willing to live with the discomfort of our changing opinions as we learn about nuance.
I think that's a great answer. It actually leads me to one more question. A lot of people look at us activists or advocates or call us influencers, and we don't have the answers. I mean, I don't think that we have the answers. I think a lot of professionals, people like you, have the answers. So I'm asking you now to say something to the Jewish people about, just to wrap this up, what do you want for them? What do you suggest for them, coming from your background and your know-how, to wrap it up so it stays with them at the end, to the Jewish people?
My mom's advice. We're still breathing, so we have choices. There's no avenue of connecting to other people, tikkun olam, hasbara, explaining what's going on, that is unavailable to you today because you didn't do it yesterday. You can always choose, even if it's just for today, see how it goes, to be the kind of person you really wish you were in the face of this.
I think that's a great way to wrap up our conversation. Debbie, Dr. Debbie Gilboa, Dr. G, thank you for coming on. I'm that. Really appreciate it.
It's really been awesome. Thanks for the conversation.
Well, that's it. Thank you for joining me on I'm That. I hope you enjoyed the chat, and I hope you'll join me for our next guest. In the meantime, definitely hit subscribe, whether you're on Apple, Amazon, Spotify, Google, or any other platform. And if you can, leave a comment, give it a like, and tell your friends. That would be brilliant. Stay tuned for the next show, and see you soon.